Hey everybody! Welcome to part 3 of my series, How to Eat for $10 a Week. So this week we're going to talk about gardening. I was going to call this section homesteading, but then I thought no, people are going to get scared away with the animals and stuff. So today I'm just going to talk about gardening. And honestly, that's how you can save the most money. Like, forget about getting chickens, forget about getting goats or cows or pigs or whatever you had in mind. Because honestly, it's easier and faster, and most of the time it's cheaper to just go to Walmart and buy that stuff if you're not picky about the quality. So gardening is the way to go if you want to save the most money. First of all, I'm going to talk about vegetables. So most of my vegetables end up in the freezer. I don't do a lot of canning, but I've frozen beans, broccoli, sweet corn, what else? I'm trying to think. Asparagus. There's a lot of vegetables that do well frozen. So some of the vegetables I can would be tomatoes. For example, I've got some salsa here that I made a year or two ago. And with tomatoes, I'll also do ketchup and tomato juice sometimes, and a lot of tomato puree because I can use that as a base for sauces. So that's what I do with the tomatoes. This year I'm actually not doing any tomatoes because they're gonna become ripe right around my due date, and I do not want to be canning with an infant. So this year I'm just gonna buy tomato paste, and you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not having a huge garden. So anyways, that's my tomatoes. And then sometimes I'll grow pickles or cucumbers, I guess, and turn them into pickles or relish. We don't go through a lot of relish or pickles, so that's maybe once every 2 or 3 years I'll do that. Next, I'll talk about fruit. Now, fruit is a great way to save money. It's actually much better than vegetables. If you're trying to save money, grow your own fruit. We grow strawberries and raspberries. Those are things I have in my garden, and rhubarb too. And then we also have a little orchard that I totally love, and I can't take credit for it because somebody else planted it. But that orchard has plums, peaches, we've got pears. I canned some of these pears a couple years ago. And quite a few apples. What else? 2 different kinds of cherries, grapes, like just a whole slew of fruits that come from our orchard. I make applesauce. So if you've got apples that have dropped on the ground, and apples are something you don't have to grow those, like, well, I'm in Michigan, so if you're in an area that grows apples, you probably have a neighbor with a wild apple tree that you can just kind of fudge off of, and say, hey, I'll give you some applesauce if you let me have your bad apples. And you can pick out the spots, make applesauce. I also do dried apples sometimes. I've got some dried cherries here. You can use dried cherries or any kind of dried fruit in granola, and that'll save you some money. So that is fruit, and a lot of my fruit gets frozen. The berries for sure get frozen. I don't like canning fruits or vegetables really because the heat destroys some of the nutrients. So most of those go in the freezer. I don't do a lot of jam just because jam isn't really the best for you, and we don't really have jam because we don't have bread. So I don't do a lot of that, but I do freeze quite a bit, and I can stuff the pears and peaches. I usually can, and applesauce. So next I'm going to talk about spices, and spices are definitely like a once every couple years kind of thing. I have some perennial herbs that come back every single year. For example, sage. Sage is great. I got my sage plant literally like 10 years ago. It was a couple dollars, and I planted it, and when I got married and moved out, I brought it with me, and it's still here and doing very well. Probably too well. I've cut it back a couple times. So, but the actual processing of the sage and drying it and stuff, I only do that every couple years because we don't go through that much sage. So that's that. And then I did some basil last year. I dried and powdered some basil, and I've used that quite a bit. But basil is an annual, and if you're gardening and you don't want a lot of work, you probably want to stay away from annuals because you have to keep planting them every single year, whereas a perennial just comes back by itself. So that's the basil. And then you can also do seeds. This is coriander seed, and I've also done mustard seed, but again, those are just a little more work than the basil. So that might be a once every 3 or 4 years project, just because it's so time intensive, and I only have so much time for gardening every year, and so I have to pick and choose what I'm going to grow. So lastly, for the spices, I've got these sun-dried tomatoes, and you might not think about it, but you can actually make quite a few different things with your basic fruits and vegetables. Like the tomatoes, I can make a spice, I can make a sauce, I can make a condiment. So that's one way you can grow like one crop and then make it stretch pretty far. So lastly, I'm going to talk about herbs. And for an example of herbs, I have this peppermint. It's dried peppermint leaves, and I use it as tea all the time. I'll just put it in like one of those tea balls and put it in some hot water, and I've got mint tea like year round. So that's really cool. And again, the mint is something that comes back every single year. I don't have to replant it. All I have to do is harvest it, dry. So when I talk about growing a garden to save money, I'm not talking about like getting all Amish and growing absolutely everything you eat. I'm just talking about sitting down every year, making a list of what's going to save you the most money, what your family goes through, and picking and choosing those things you have time for, and then just growing those. Picking things like apples or tomatoes that will stretch and that you can make several different items out of for your pantry. So that's what I've got to say about gardening. I would encourage absolutely everybody to try gardening at least once. Just give it a try. And you can start with one thing, you can start with 2 things. You don't have to go all out and plant this like 3-acre garden, I promise. So that's what we've got for today. Thanks for watching.